you have this conversation with this pastor. You see Jesus's love and care for you in a unique way that you've never really witnessed before. What happens after that?
Well, and I think the other word that's important to describe that moment is consolation. I felt like the consolation of the gospel in that man's response, and I keep coming back to that word. I love how in Luke 2, when Simeon is about to be presented with the infant Jesus, but Luke tells us he was waiting for the consolation of Israel, and meets Jesus. There's a consolation to who Jesus is. So there was reassurance, there was consolation. Someone in the universe actually understood and knew and was still talking to me. And it was still a few years before I then started to tell my friends. That would have been around the time I think I was about 30, early 30s. And that was a profoundly healing process as well. Again, just feeling, okay, I'm now actually beginning to be more deeply known by the people I most care about than I had been before.
Yeah. Does there come a turning point when you recognize that I need to speak more openly about this in order to pastor people?
Not yet. Because once I'd finished telling the handful of friends and family that I thought ought to know about this, I remember thinking, okay, I'm done now. I've finished talking about this.
Yeah.
I've gone through everyone I feel like ought to know about this, or I want to know about this. I don't have to talk about this anymore. Right. Fantastic. We're done. Finished. No more. And someone even said to me, do you think you'll ever sort of do ministry on this? I said, oh, no way. I do not want to be that guy. And I specifically remember thinking, I don't want to be the guy who kind of gets wheeled around to talk about his sexual feelings. Yeah. I was very, very clear on that point.
Right.
But that changed in my heart in around 2012. That was when in the UK you were really seeing the cultural shifts happen very, very obviously around you. People I had trained with at seminary were beginning to change in their convictions. You were feeling the cultural pressure that we were going through our own national conversation about gay marriage at that stage. Mm-hmm. And I just had this burden on my heart that and typically what you'd hear is some very lovely sounding gay rights activist presenting the case for same-sex marriage, and then some cranky conservative saying why it's all wrong.
Right.
And I just thought we need someone from inside this topic to speak to it. Yeah. And I just had a burden. I just wanted people to know that Jesus' word to people in my situation is a good word. It's not easy, but it's a good word. Yeah. And I was getting to the stage where I couldn't not say that. So I had to say I was working for a church at the time, I had to say to the rest of the church leadership, I was an assistant pastor, I said, I really feel like I need to say something. They all knew anyway, I'd been open with them about this particular struggle. And so they gave their blessing on that. So I first shared with our church family in a prayer meeting, then wrote a little article for them, waited a month or two, and then posted that article online. And everything just kind of blew up after that.
Took off from there. Did that go viral?
It did. TGC picked it up and ran with it.
Okay.
And what I hadn't realised, two things I hadn't anticipated. One was that I would actually feel quite comfortable talking about this. I'd assumed it would just be too distressing. I feel too much shame. I'm English, so I'm not, I'm too repressed anyway to talk about the heart. This is just way too personal. I will never feel. I can write an article, but that's it. I would never feel comfortable talking about this. And I gave a talk on it at a friend's church. It was a very kind of safe context, and I just felt a freedom, just a complete freedom to speak about it. And the other thing I hadn't anticipated was how much that kind of voice was needed right then, everywhere. It felt like.
Yeah.